Hey, thanks for coming out. By the way, how many college students are here? All right. Okay, well, then we have to warn you that there's a trigger warning on this entire discussion. I hope you're going to be able to handle that. There may be numerous microaggressions. So this is definitively not a safe space for many of you. And by the way, really good luck with that student loan business. I appreciate it. Let me just give you a little bit of background. About 26 years or so ago, I wrote a book called Prof Scam about professors and how they didn't like to spend time teaching students and how the curriculum had become a mess and political correctness was becoming more and more of a problem on American university campuses. And last year, thing. And amazingly, just at that moment when people were starting to wonder, is it really actually worth tuition, which, as many of you know, college tuition these days is like buying a BMW every year and driving it off a cliff. And yeah, that's a good deal, huh? And at this very moment, American higher education started to lose its mind with the snowflake rebellion. And of course, the snowflakes, everybody's heard the phrase snowflakes, right? We don't have to define that. The hyper sensitive cry-bullies on campus who are so frail and so fragile, that even the wrong word or look is going to crush them. And so I actually had to call up my publisher and say, look, could you delay publication of this book so that we can talk about what's going on here? We're going to get to a lot of these incidents. And I think a lot of you are familiar with the headline incidents. I mean, do you remember Melissa Click from the University of Missouri? How many of you here know? I need some muscle over here because there was some free speech breaking out on campus, and fortunately, she's been fired. And then there's then there was the story of the student at Yale. Remember, did you see that video? A young woman. She's at Yale, so therefore she's obviously a victim. And she's screaming obscenities at a professor whose wife had written an email basically saying, hey, if you're offended by Halloween costumes, don't look at the Halloween costumes. And that's what triggered the sensitivity revolt. But I think the defining moment of this snowflake revolt, and I have to actually share this with you, was at Brown University. And I think this kind of captures exactly what's going on campus these days. At Brown University, they were going to have a debate on campus on sexual assault. And this was so traumatizing that they had to create a safe space for students who did not want to be exposed to ideas that they didn't want to hear on this campus. And this safe space, and I actually have to read this verbatim, included cookies, coloring books, bubbles, Play-Doh, calming music, blankets, and I'm not making this up, a video of frolicking puppies. And there were also then counselors on hand to help Brown University students cope with the trauma of ideas that they didn't like. And in case you want to look this up, Brown University costs more than $68,000 a year. And I can get a BMW actually for less than that. So we're going to talk about safe spaces and what that's like. And by the way, apparently CPAC didn't turn out to be a safe space for Donald Trump, did it? I guess. I had to get that shot in. We have an outstanding panel here, and we're going to hear from them all. Dr. Everett Piper, the president of Oklahoma Wesleyan University, the winner. You may have heard him last night, the winner of the Gene Kirkpatrick Award. We have Princeton University senior Josh Zuckerman. Karen Agnes, who is at Harvard right now as a fellow, who is the president of an organization, not to be confused with NOW, it's called NEW, the National Enlightened Women. And I'd like them to, which of course is, an enlightened woman is the opposite of a member of NOW. So I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves, and we're going to talk about what it is like being a conservative on campus and what is happening on campus right now. So Karen Agnes, you want to go first?
Thank you, Charlie. It's great to be here. I wanted to start by asking a couple questions of the audience, especially those college students out there. How many of you have been marginalized on campus because you don't keep saying the liberal views that your professors want you to say? Yeah? How many of you, when you're with your friends, sometimes don't always say what you want to because of the peer pressure as conservatives? Or you worry about your grades because if you don't say what your professors want, you worry your grades will suffer. That's a problem on our college campuses. And it's tough. It's really tough out there. But the good news is that one of the most important things you can do on your campus and most rewarding things you can do is learn to speak out and stand up as a conservative. And you should be doing that. Because on our campuses, there's a silencing going on. When I was on campus at the University of Virginia, we had our protests, but we're seeing a new trend that these liberals on campus don't just want to protest when we have conservative speakers, they don't even want them to be able to speak on the campus. It's a silencing that's going on. And we talk about intellectual diversity. Where's the intellectual diversity on our college campuses? And I wanted to give a special shout out to the women out there in the crowd, because yes, the conservative women. Because when you step on campus today, you face women's organizations, you face women's centers, you face women's studies departments, all pushing a left-wing agenda. And if you don't go along to get along, your voice doesn't matter to them. And again, a huge problem. And that's what I faced at the University of Virginia when I was a student. I went to our women's center and asked if they would co-sponsor a new organization for conservative women. Imagine the response. Yes. They looked at me like I was crazy, started laughing, and said, "Not here." And that's when I started the Network of Enlightened Women, or NEW, as an organization for conservative women. And we've now spread to campuses across the country. We held a national conference in DC where we are educating young women on conservative values and cultivating a true community of these women on campuses. And I think that's the key here, is you need to stand up, start an organization, join an organization, write a letter to the editor, because if you don't make your voice heard, it's not going to be heard. And it's tough on these campuses, but the good news is, the positive side of that, it is a great training ground for principled conservative leaders. And that is what we need more of in this country.
Thank you. Now, during the Snowflake Revolt, many of you probably read something that our next panelist actually wrote. Dr. Piper, Everett Piper, I think is probably the only, as far as I can tell, the only university president in the country to basically call out the snowflakes with a piece called "It's Not Daycare, It's a University." And so, Dr. Piper.
Well, I did write a piece back in Thanksgiving. In fact, on Thanksgiving morning, this particular piece titled, "This is not a daycare, this is a university," went viral. The situation for me was this. We actually had a student on our campus at a required chapel, which we still have at Oklahoma Wesleyan University, a Christian liberal arts institution. We had a student who was offended by a sermon that was delivered in chapel. The sermon was on 1 Corinthians 13. And if you don't remember, that is the quintessential love chapter of the Bible. The sermon was on love, pure and simple. It wasn't politics, it wasn't pointed, it wasn't sarcastic, it was a sermon on love. The student called the speaker aside afterwards and said, "I felt singled out today, and my peers, my group felt singled out. We're offended." The speaker called me and said, "I had the victim card played on me today." I actually had a student issue a trigger warning on 1 Corinthians 13. I was incredulous. I thought to myself, you can't make this up. This is too good. I wrote an article. It was published in a local newspaper. Fox News picked it up. Glenn Beck picked it up, and others. And essentially I said this: You know that uncomfortable feeling you had when you heard that sermon? It's called your conscience. There was a time when a good sermon was supposed to make you feel uncomfortable. There was a time when a good sermon was supposed to make you feel like confessing your sins rather than us coddling you in your narcissism and self-absorption. This institution is not interested in safe places. This institution is interested in confronting your character and encouraging you to grow. This is not a daycare, this is a university. One last word. I wrote a book a couple years ago. I titled it, Why I'm a Liberal and Other Conservative Ideas. And in that book, I'm arguing this. As a conservative, I'm more interested in classical liberty and liberation and freedom and justice than my left-of-center counterpart. Thus, I conserve the time-tested truths of God, and I'm open to a robust debate and exchange of ideas because truth will judge the debate, not you and not me, but truth gives us the freedom to engage, debate, and learn.
Thank you. Thank you. And our next panelist comes from right from the belly of the beast, the Ivy League. Josh Zuckerman testified earlier this week. Was it earlier this week?
Yes, Wednesday.
In front of Congress about what is going on in American university campuses. He's a senior at Princeton University. Josh.
Okay, so I'd like to take a second and talk about what's happening at Princeton specifically, because it's a microcosm of what's happening nationwide. And we've seen these protests across the country. They basically boil down to, hey, I have a victim complex, I'm offended, you offend me, your ideas offend me, you need to be re-educated, and your ideas need to get off my campus. And that is completely unacceptable. We recently saw this at Princeton when, last November, some racial justice protesters occupied the president's office and issued some outrageous demands. And in response to these demands, some like-minded dissenting students and I founded an organization called the Princeton Open Campus Coalition, POCC. We're a group of very diverse students. We're Democrats, Republicans, we're black, we're white, we're gay, we're straight. Very diverse group, and we are devoted to maintaining the principle that free speech is essential to campus life. Everyone on campus...
Radical.
Everyone on campus, student or professor, has the right to advance their beliefs in a manner that is free from intimidation and free from university orthodoxies. So, since being founded in November, we've led the campus fight against racial justice protesters' demands. We've met with Princeton's president, the board of trustees, we've published op-eds in the National Review, and appeared on Fox News. So, enough about us. I want to talk about these protesters and their demands. So when they occupied the president's office, they made a handful of demands, and real quick, I'd like to address two. First off, they said that all the professors should have to go to mandatory cultural competency training. So, in other words, if you're a professor and you're not politically correct, you need to go off and get rehabilitated. Now, secondly, they demanded that every student have to take a class in marginalized peoples. So, in other words, if you're a student and you disagree with these protesters, you need to go off and get indoctrinated by the university. Now, POCC opposes each of these demands because we think they will stifle free thought. Now, to be clear, these protesters do not like free thought. And to demonstrate this point, I want to read to you a passage from an op-ed that a protester wrote in Princeton student newspaper. The passage says, "If your freedom of thought means that I, a black student, do not have the luxury of feeling safe on a campus that I have worked my entire life to get to, it should have no place in universities."
Ooh.
Yeah. So this is pretty strange because protesters are saying, hey, free thought does not belong in college. That's funny because the entire point of college is to encourage free thought. They have not gotten this memo. In addition to this, they're trying to bully dissenting students into silence. Two fast examples. One, a black friend of mine put on Facebook that he opposes the demands of these racial justice protesters. He was then told that he was a race traitor, and a protester told him his white friends did not care about him. Second example, A student wrote an article in the Campus Conservative magazine, and she defended free speech on campus. Somebody printed out a copy of her article, tore it up, found out where she lived, and taped it to her door. That's not just intimidation, that's stalking, and that's not acceptable. These tactics are ridiculous and disgusting. They have no place in American universities, and what they want is to turn Princeton and all of our other colleges into PC echo chambers, and we cannot let that happen.
So Kat, I want to pivot from that to talk about what is it like to be a conservative on campus. I actually was talking right before the program with one of Josh's classmates, and he said, you know, he thinks that they might represent a majority on their campus, but you would never know it because conservatives have learned to shut up, to keep their heads down. Is that your experience? Are conservatives becoming more willing to speak up and challenge some of this stuff, or are most conservatives that silent minority majority?
I think it's a challenge because when you have faculty, I saw one study that 72% of faculty were donating to Democrats.
Yeah.
When you are worried about your grades, you're worried about jobs in this economy, there's some pressure to keep quiet. And so that's why I think it's so important to have organizations and radio hosts like yourself, college presidents, speaking out as role models and mentors, try and encourage people to stand out. And those conservatives benefit from learning how to speak out and make arguments, but the liberal students do as well. Because one thing they miss when there's no conservative voices on campus is how to engage and how to debate more effectively. And so we need to have those conservative voices on campus, not just for the conservative students, but for intellectual diversity in general helps everybody on campus.
Yeah. Dr. Weber, is this getting worse? Because, you know, you could argue, look, political correctness has been a problem for 20 or 30 years. And yet there seems to be these multiplication of the invisible tripwires of grievance. You know, the University of California came out with a list of things you can't say. You can't say America is a melting pot. You can't, ask a student, why don't you speak up more in class? These are all microaggressions. What do you sense is happening on campus? Is it because they have become increasingly radicalized? Do we have a generation of snowflakes coming to campus? Why is it accelerating this way?
I personally believe it's a result and it's the consequence of several decades of teaching lousy ideas. I addressed it last night in my speech to the Reagan Gala. Richard Weaver told us in 1948 that ideas have consequences. That was the title of his seminal work. What was his point? What was his premise? Ideas have consequences. Ideas always lead somewhere. Bad ideas lead to bad culture, bad community, bad college. Good ideas lead to the opposite. So I think we're reaping the results. To quote Barack Obama's pastor, the chickens are coming home to roost. What we've done is taught this ideological narcissism. We've taught ideological fascism, and that's really what we have today. We have an ideological fascism that's prevailing on the college campus rather than the academic freedom that we hold dear. The Liberal Arts Academy was established, let's go back to Oxford some 1,000 years ago, to educate a free man and a free woman, to liberate us, to give us an understanding of liberty and liberation and freedom and justice, and to give us the context for embracing those truths. And when we get rid of those ideas and embrace the narcissism of our time, we're going to suffer the consequences accordingly, and it will result in a fascist attitude of you shall submit, you shall agree, and if you don't, you shall be silenced and you shall be expelled. That is what's prevailing on the campus today.
Well, Josh, also, sometimes what I hear from the universities is that, in fact, that a lot of students are more hypersensitive, that we have a generation of kids who've been raised with the gold stars and the happy faces and are all told how wonderful and precious they all are. They're not used to adversity, and they actually believe that they have a right to always feel good about themselves, and they have a right not to be offended. So, are you a generation of snowflakes?
Well, I hope I'm not, but in reality, like a lot of the people I'm seeing on campus, yes, we're completely surrounded by snowflakes who feel so threatened, not by actions, but ideas. You call them out on something they're saying, and suddenly you're a racist, you're a homophobe, you hate women, you name it, they take everything. If you rebut their ideas, they take it personally and get offended and go cry and need their safe spaces, basically. So yes.
Okay, I'm going to follow up on that because I'm convinced that this spring is going to see massive revolts all across American university campuses, because on every single campus there's already a set of demands locked and loaded, like the ones that you mentioned, and including it at Princeton to change the name of the Woodrow Wilson School, which I think is deliciously ironic.
Yeah.
when this next wave breaks, how will the administration react? Because those of us that remember the 60s and the 70s remember that the default setting of the college president, with all due respect, college president is to cave in, is to give in to the demands. Do you think that that's happening now? Do you expect, how will Princeton's administration stand up?
Well, first off, I'd like to say that if these protests get any crazier this spring, I don't even know how that's possible. I think we've reached the maximum level of insanity, I hope. So,
have you been watching the presidential race?
fair. The one thing that's worse.
Okay, all right.
So what we've seen at Princeton, the administration, it's done a very good job of listening to both sides. What I would like to see administrators do is stand up for what they believe in. In my experience, every professor I've had at Princeton, liberal or conservative, is very fair, very open-minded, and very respectful to dissenting ideas. Now, I know this has not been true for some of the professors my friends have had, but I've been lucky. And I think that the university is genuinely committed to the free exchange of ideas. I'd like to see the administration actually stand up for themselves and say that, which to a lot of them just haven't gotten this far and have not made this key step.
Okay. Karen, what do you think in terms of how are administrations, and I think it's an interesting question because, as I said before, you would have a lot of administrations, I think, would cave in. Now I think there is also a backlash. And I think that you can embarrass the schools. I think even liberal mainstream media has been siding with people who've been calling out some of the absurdity. They can be shamed, they can be embarrassed. So do you see an opportunity to push back on the administrations?
I do. So our American University chapter of NU tried to bring in a couple conservative speakers, and students spoke out and complained that the student activities fees should not be used at all for conservative speakers.
Right.
As if they should only be used for half of ideas on campus. Doesn't make sense. So we are seeing those protests. I think we're going to see more of it. But as a fellow Midwesterner, I'd like to call out one of our Midwestern university presidents. Do we have any Midwesterners in the house?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah? Good. So I'm from the great state of Indiana, where we have Mitch Daniels, the president of Purdue University. And I'm really looking to him for a model of higher education reform. He went to Princeton, but he, at Purdue, they were the first university to adopt University of Chicago statements and follow that on free speech. So I'm hoping that more presidents will follow that lead. And I think we can look to him for some higher education reform ideas.
Because there actually is some common ground between liberals and conservatives, Democrats and Republicans on this issue of free speech. And this is not something, so for the average university president though, is it the appeal to their conscience? Is it appeal to their wallet? Is it appeal to whether they're able to raise funds? What is the pressure point to not have American universities cave into these left-wing pressures?
Well, my opinion is college and university presidents are like any other folks that are trying to protect their career. And it's often the case that the university is run by the faculty and the university is run by the student more than it is the president. In fact, Peter Drucker was once asked if there were any organizations that he had found impossible to lead in his decades of consulting kings and heads of state across the world. And he said, yes, there are two organizations that are impossible to lead, the church and the college. Because of the competing constituencies, nobody knows who the boss is. So the university presidents are afraid.
Right.
They're afraid, and it's unusual for them to step forward and have a spine and have a backbone and call a spade and say what they believe in terms of right and wrong, just and unjust, and how we're going to run this place. That is unusual. I can say this. That piece that I wrote had 1,014,000 views on the Oklahoma Wesleyan website. It had another million. It had another million on Fox and Friends. It had another million on NBC Today. And of all those comments, 99% or better were favorable. And I received comments from across the country of people saying, thank you for speaking up, thank you for having a backbone, and thank you for taking the lead. The point is this: I think there is a reward and there is protection from the masses, if you will, if leadership will step forward and say, follow me.
As you know, I'm from Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and we actually have I am convinced, well, we're sort of used to having the cheesehead domination. We're used to being at the center of American politics, but I also think we're going to be at the center of this debate over academic freedom. And I just have to mention, somebody who's in the audience today, Professor John McAdams. Can you just stand up and wave there, John? Come on. John McAdams, who, let me tell you, John McAdams, you want to talk about a hero of academic freedom. Marquette University is an allegedly Catholic university that is now in the process of trying to fire a senior tenured professor of political science for something he wrote on his blog. What happened was there was an instructor in a class at this Catholic university who told the class that she would not permit any opinions to be expressed in opposition to gay marriage. When the student approached the teacher and said, really, I'm not allowed at this university to express this opinion, she explained on tape that yes, that this was the kind of offensive, racist, homophobic speech that was banned at this Catholic university. That in fact, that if you express support for Catholic doctrine at this allegedly Catholic university, you would be shut down. John McAdams committed the flagrant act of journalism of writing accurately and truthfully about what happened, and the university suspended him and is in the process of trying to fire him, which would be, I think, probably the single most outrageous abuse of academic freedom in the country. Now, going back to Dr. Piper's point, one of the decisions that Marquette has to make is whether they want to basically call down that fire on their heads, whether they want to be the poster child. Because I think this is a case that's going to be watched by liberal professors and conservative professors around the country to see how far they're willing to go. And to the extent that academic freedom is going to win out, it will be because they are shamed by doing this. So I want to ask you as well, given how absurd I think some of these protests have become, and they are easy to make fun of. I mean, it is easy to make fun of the trigger warnings on books. People who go through works of literature, how many rapes take place, how many traumatic things, with the assumption that you're a college student and you can't read great works of literature without being warned about it. It's easy to make fun of the microaggressions. Is this an opportunity, though, for conservatives on campus to basically say to your fellow students, do you want to be part of this, or would this be the moment to say, you might want to be breaking with this? My experience has been that college can be a great way of shall we say, reforming and helping liberal students to see their way. Do you think there's an opportunity here for conservatives on campus?
I really do. I'll be brief and answer first and let others have time to do likewise. I'll give you one example. I received a letter in the midst of the Not a Day grass fire that I started. It was from the University of Central Florida. It was from the psychology department, a Fulbright scholar. It essentially said this: Dr. Piper, I read your Not a Daycare article, period. I've also gone to your website and read other articles, blogs that you've posted, period. As an atheist and as a liberal, I disagree with your religion and I disagree with your politics, and I dismiss them both. But on this issue, thank you, kudos, please continue to say this again. My point is this: he welcomed leadership, he welcomed common sense, he welcomed the freedom that comes with natural law, and he was begging for someone to lead him, even though we disagree on some things, to lead him toward greater liberty and liberation in the academy rather than succumb to the ideological fascism.
Josh?
Absolutely, and just to build on that point, which was very well made, free speech is not just a conservative principle, it is not just a liberal principle, it is an American principle, and this is an opportunity for everyone, left and right, to stand up in defense of this. Now, what's going to happen to those who do? Well, my black friend, who is a Bernie Sanders supporter, not exactly conservative, he was called a race traitor. One of my white friends, Devin, who's in the audience today, she wrote an article in the student newspaper, and she said, hey, this is hypocritical, having these anti-racism protesters make race-based judgments. She was called a racist at a public open forum. And if the worst thing that happens to you is that you get called a racist, well, so be it. You've offended the special snowflakes. Life will go on. And if that's the only cost of getting your ideas out there, you've won. They're basically just the Donald Trumps of the left. They have no rational arguments. They're just going to scream at you.
My experience has also been that I think conservatives on campus have an advantage because many liberals that come to campus have never actually met a rational conservative before because they live in their own bubbles. They in fact, especially academics, when you confront them with rational, reasonable conservative arguments, they're unarmed. They're not prepared to do it. And if you're on campus and you basically point to the stuff that's going on and say, look, this is what the left is, and they're nuts. Do you notice that they are nuts? What do you think, Karen?
But here's the problem. We're all here. We all know that free speech is a huge issue on campus. Yeah. There's a lack of intellectual diversity. There's a silencing going on. But the problem is the student who just goes to college for the first time, isn't exposed to these ideas, they just get slowly pushed to the left until they're too far gone to even get them back. And so that's why I think it's so important for everybody here to make sure to share these ideas with students. We've now started a program, a Young Women's Leadership Retreat, where we get them before they go to college, before they can get indoctrinated with these ideas. Because I think college is doing a huge disservice to students when you have administrators, faculty, and students all pushing them one way. It's tough. It's an uphill battle. We've got to fight it, but we have to realize what we're up against.
In terms of how you actually turn American universities around, I mean, I actually think, and I'm going to argue in my book, that there is the perfect storm going on right now of the student of the higher education bubble, and people are asking questions that they didn't ask before. There are more alternatives than there ever have been before. But what would you say, Dr. Piper? I know you're a private university. What would you say to state legislators about, or funders, people who write out checks? Is it about time that conservatives who actually care about these issues begin to say that we are no longer going to be the piggy bank for left-wing universities with their indoctrination?
Absolutely. I was on the O'Reilly Factor, and Mr. O'Reilly asked me at the end of the interview, what's the solution to this problem that we're discussing? Well, the solution is this. Stop sending your kids to these institutions that can teach this problem. Again, recognize the power of ideas, and I think one of the things we need to recognize as a group is the power of the rhetorical question. Can you tolerate my intolerance? Are you sure you hate those hateful people? Do you know that nothing can be known? Are you absolutely confident there are no absolutes? Ask these rhetorical questions that shines a light on the duplicity of this argument and this foreclosed debate of a closed mind. Shine the light of freedom and a robust disagreement on this debate and show those that are funding the nonsense that it's a waste of money. And I really do think it's an opportunity for us to win.
So Josh, what would be the one piece of advice that you would give to other students on campus that are faced with the kinds of things, and by the way, any student on any campus is going to be facing similar kinds of problems. What is your advice in the next several months when the revolts start again? What should they do?
Two things. One, never be quiet. Do not be intimidated into silence and stand up for what you believe in. And two, find like-minded students, get together, form a group, fight back, have debates, have discussion, write articles, and win this through reasoned dialogue, not name-calling and ad hominem attacks. Win with reason and knowledge.
Mm-hmm.
Karen?
Yeah.
Good advice.
Good advice there. And I would also say at most universities, there is a professor who is a conservative or open-minded liberal professor. Find them, engage with them, get to know them, and they often have a group of students around them who they can connect you with and can help really further what college is supposed to be about and getting engaged on ideas and educated on them.
I mean, I think that what we've been seeing now is a real threat. I mean, it's a threat to the American mind. It's a threat to the quality of education. It is a threat, and I think that a lot of us feel right now there's an existential threat to a lot of the values that we have, that we've built this country on. On the other hand, I think there's also an opportunity here. And I think that you're going to see over the next few years, you're going to see a pushback in American higher education. And I think that the success of what you did was an indication of the fact that if you speak out, you're going to have an audience, and that you will be able to change hearts and minds.
Absolutely. I agree.
Again, thank you so much for your attention. We appreciate this very much. Dr. Everett Piper, Josh Zuckerman from Princeton, Karen Agnes from New, and I'm Charlie Sykes. Thank you very much.
Thank you.